Hey, what's going on, you guys? My name is the Raptor, and welcome back to Who'd Win and Why. And this time we've got Human Torch of the Fantastic Four going up against Iceman of the X-Men. Now, both of these Marvel superheroes have great control over their elemental abilities, and their powers allow them to do some pretty ridiculous things. But now it's time for me to decide who I think would realistically win in a one-on-one battle to the death. So, who'd win and why? Let's find out! Okay, so first we're going to talk about the Human Torch. So obviously when it comes to the Human Torch, his main thing is pyrokinesis. And when it comes to his abilities, not only can he manipulate fire, he can also generate it. He can shoot out amazing quantities of fire all at once, which can burn at around 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit on average. That's about the melting point of iron, so that's pretty hot. And he can also control any surrounding fire in his environment, whether or not he generated it, and he can add it to his attacks. And this goes without saying, but he's obviously completely immune to any sort of fire or burning attacks. Human Torch also possesses a degree of thermokinesis, which means that he can control the ambient heat energy in his environment. However, he also likes to use his thermokinesis to control the temperatures of different objects. For example, he can lower an object's temperature by about 30 degrees Fahrenheit, but he can also raise it by several hundred. So clearly he can severely increase the temperature of other things, not just himself. Speaking of heating himself up, obviously there are many different uses for his pyrokinesis, but arguably the most notable one is his plasma form, where not only does he encase himself in flames, but he also literally goes from a solid form to a form completely made out of plasma, or fire. And this form usually burns at around 780 degrees Fahrenheit on average, but he can make it go much hotter if he wants to. This is his main combat form, and it does make him much harder to harm. However, he can only really maintain this form for about 17 hours before he's forced back to his solid form. Human Torch can also use his fire abilities to obtain the powers of flight, by sort of forming a fire jet beneath his feet and propelling himself through the air. When it comes to his average flight speed, it clocks in at about 140 miles per hour, but it's very clear that he can go much faster, as he's been able to catch up to the Silver Surfer while he's flying around in orbit. And to give that more context, the Silver Surfer flies at about Mach 5 when he's in the inner orbit, and Mach 10 when he's in the outer orbit. So the fact that he's able to catch up to him is very impressive. Along with Human Torch's increased speed, while he might not have that much of a high degree of strength, he does seem to have a high degree of durability, considering that he's able to take hits from extremely strong characters, such as the Thing, Namor, and even Gladiator, and sometimes this is done without being in his plasma form. That's pretty crazy if you ask me. Human Torch can also use his fire powers to create fiery constructs, and this is limited just by his imagination, but it is worth noting that constructs that are more complex or much bigger do require more fire and more concentration. It's also worth noting that these things will only last for about 3 minutes until they burn out, unless he infuses them with more energy. Regardless though, the fact that he's able to do this at all is pretty impressive, and it shows how much control he has over his pyrokinesis. But, now let's talk about how hot this guy can really get. Human Torch refers to the hottest version of the plasma form that he can generate as his Nova Flame, and while he can't maintain this flame for nearly as long as his regular plasma form, it still makes him way more powerful, and he can shoot out much deadlier and much hotter attacks. While the hottest temperature while in this form is currently unknown, we do know that he does have his most powerful attack, which he calls his Nova Burst. And when he uses this, he essentially releases all the stored energy that he has in his body in all directions, creating a massive fire attack that measures 900 feet in diameter. And this burns at around 1 million degrees Fahrenheit. That's really freaking hot. However, it is worth knowing that after he uses this, he essentially loses almost all of his abilities, if not all of them, and must wait for about 12 hours before he regains them. Obviously, Human Torch has taken down some pretty powerful villains alongside the Fantastic Four, and he is definitely one of the best fire manipulators on the planet. However, it is worth noting that Human Torch is very cocky and impulsive during battle, and can get very reckless at times. Also, while he can produce a virtually unlimited supply of fire, he is still human and he can't go on forever. Overall though, Human Torch may be an annoying jokester, but he should not be underestimated. He definitely has the most firepower out of any Fantastic Four member, and he can always be counted on to turn up the heat in any battle he's in. Alright, so now it's time to move on to Iceman. So Iceman is actually one of the limited number of mutants to actually be classified as an Omega level mutant, which is the highest level of classification you can give a mutant when it comes to their power. And technically, an Omega level mutant is supposed to have the power to destroy the world, at least when it comes to their potential. However, whether or not it's potentially, Iceman is still a pretty freaking powerful dude. Obviously, Iceman's main ability is cryokinesis, which means that he can both control and generate ice, snow, and cold temperatures. He can freeze anything, even the air moisture, into super hard ice, and he can unfreeze any matter that he has previously frozen. Iceman can freeze anything and produce attacks at the absolute zero temperature, which is where molecular motion stops. And with this kind of power, he's been able to stop a gigantic nuclear explosion, is able to create a blizzard under certain circumstances, and was able to freeze over hell itself. Oh, and he's also completely immune to icy and cold attacks. Iceman also possesses thermokinesis, meaning that he can mentally control the temperature of the air and cool it to unimaginable degrees. He can also lower the temperature of the air simply by his mere presence or by the use of his regular attacks. But it doesn't stop there. Iceman can use his thermokinetic abilities to essentially lower his own body temperature to absolute zero. And what he used to do was just create an icy covering around him, and that would essentially act as his ice form. However, Iceman has evolved to the point where he can essentially become organic ice, where he becomes completely translucent and becomes ice inside and out. This form can augment his strength, and it can also make him much more resistant to physical attacks. Iceman can also use his cryokinetic abilities to create ice constructs, and these are limited just by his imagination. Iceman is able to do this by freezing the surrounding air moisture and mentally creating a shape, and these objects will stay frozen as long as he can feed them more ice, or if the surrounding environment is cold enough. Iceman has essentially evolved to the point where he can do all of these things with a simple thought, as well as freezing other people and objects. And Iceman's constructs are pretty dang strong. One of them was actually able to encase the Hulk and hold him back for quite a bit of time. That's pretty impressive if you ask me. Along with all of these amazing abilities that Iceman has, Iceman also gains self-repairing abilities, as he's able to literally reform part of his body if it's been broken off, or reform his entire body even if it's been completely shattered. And he's also able to reform himself if he's been turned into another state of matter, such as liquid or gas. And even though he is technically more durable or more resistant to physical attacks while he's in his ice form, he's been shown that he can actually reform himself even if he was previously in human form, as he was once incinerated while in human form and he still came back. Now don't get the wrong idea, this doesn't mean he's immortal. There are still many ways that he can be killed, but from a physical standpoint, that's still going to be pretty damn hard to do. Iceman also possesses a very high degree of hydrokinesis, as he's able to control water at a molecular level just like ice. He can turn water into ice and vice versa with ease, and he's also able to retain the use of his powers and retain consciousness if he's transformed into water or water vapor. But even after all that, we're still not done. Using Iceman's freezing abilities combined with his hydrokinesis, he's actually able to create many different ice clones of himself to outnumber an opponent. And not even that, he can also absorb surrounding water or water vapor to literally make himself giant. He can gain a giant form, and in this form he gains even more strength and becomes even more resistant to physical attacks. With this all being said though, Iceman is not without his fair share of weaknesses. Iceman may not be particularly dumb, but he is known to be the jokester of the X-Men, and he's not really the best strategist, at least not on his own. And while Iceman may be hard to put down physically, his mind is still just as vulnerable as any humans, and he does have a mental limit to how long he can use his powers. Regardless, however, as long as there's surrounding moisture, and quite probably even if there isn't any, Iceman is a threat. He has grown in power so much over the course of the comics, and while he might not be the most serious X-Man out there, his abilities more than prove why he is one of the few mutants to be classified as Omega. Alright, so now that I've gone over both of these characters, it's finally time for me to decide who I think would win in a battle to the death. And I must say, this fight does seem pretty even, at least on the surface. This does sound like your pretty standard fire versus ice fight, and you know, they do seem like the equal elemental opposites of each other, because in certain ways, they kind of are. However, when you look at this fight a little more closely, you can tell that there are some pretty big differences between these characters. And when you look at those differences, I honestly believe that Iceman would be the winner of this fight, and I know that may seem a little weird to hear, considering that when you think of fire versus ice, fire is usually the one known to beat ice. And also, I know that there are probably a lot of you guys out there that do think that Human Torch will win this fight, so clearly I've got some explaining to do. So if you think that Human Torch will win this fight, that's great, that's perfectly fine, you know, tell me your reasoning down in the comments below, but first, let me try my best at explaining why I feel that Iceman would be the victor more often than not. First, there is something big about this fight that I think is important to get out of the way very quickly. While Iceman can still feel physical pain throughout the course of a battle, Iceman has essentially gotten to the point where it's impossible to put him down through physical means, considering that he can always repair his body from any sort of physical attack. And even though Human Torch definitely has the heat to be able to melt Iceman, it really won't do that much to him, considering he can always return to solid form even if he's been turned into another state of matter, such as liquid or gas, and he's even come back from being incinerated before, incinerated completely. And because apparently it takes more than just heat in order to turn something into plasma, Human Torch is not going to be turning Iceman into plasma anytime soon. And again, as I said before, Iceman is not immortal. There are still ways to kill him, and there are ways to kill him physically, such as destroying every single cell in his body completely, and there are ways to kill him mentally. But when it comes to the Human Torch, from his perspective, he might as well be immortal, considering that even the Human Torch's most powerful attack, his Nova Burst, would only turn him into gas. Because matter cannot be created or destroyed, there's really no way the Human Torch would be able to completely destroy Iceman through heat alone. It's even been basically indirectly confirmed by the comics and pointed out by fans that really the only way to actually kill Iceman is through a non-physical manner, such as some sort of mental attack or destroying his brain. And yes, in general, fire does usually beat ice, but in this case, it doesn't matter. No matter how hot Human Torch is going to be able to get, there is no way that he's going to be able to put Iceman down for good. Iceman can keep coming back, and there's just no way he's going to be killed in this battle. Now, I could just end the video here, but there are some more things I want to say about this battle. For example, some of you guys may be wondering, okay, so there's no real way the Human Torch can kill Iceman, but is there really any way that Iceman would be able to kill Human Torch? Is there any way that Iceman's ice would be able to perfectly counter Human Torch's fire? And there are some things that Iceman has done that would suggest this. For example, he's been able to freeze people at absolute zero temperatures, and he's been able to freeze over hell itself, but there are actually real numbers that we can use in order to determine whether or not Iceman would be capable of this. But first, we gotta decipher how hot the Human Torch can actually get. Considering that Human Torch has an attack that burns at 1,000,000 degrees Fahrenheit, but also completely drains him of his powers for 12 hours, that means that it really doesn't make a lot of sense for him to be able to produce attacks at this temperature, at least not usually, not even in his Nova Flame state, because why would he be able to do that if that's the kind of energy it takes for him to completely be drained of his powers? But let's give him the benefit of the doubt and say that he can burn at this temperature in his Nova Flame state, and he can also amplify this by a factor of 50. That means that his Nova Flame and his attacks while in his Nova Flame can burn at 50 million degrees Fahrenheit. Again, this is past his supposed limit, and I don't think we've really seen him do anything like this, but let's give him the benefit of the doubt and say that he can do all of this. Now let's talk about a feat that Iceman's done that we can actually apply real numbers to. One of Iceman's most impressive feats is that he's been able to stop a gigantic nuclear explosion. And in case you're wondering, the core of a nuclear explosion can range from 50 million to 150 million degrees Fahrenheit. And considering the size of this particular explosion, it makes me think that it's well on the higher side of the scale, probably well above the 50 million degrees Fahrenheit range. And because Iceman has been able to do this, that really says it all, doesn't it? Even after highballing Human Torch and putting him at a temperature that he realistically should not be able to get to in general, Iceman has still shown that he can put out temperatures or put out things that have a much higher temperature than 50 million degrees Fahrenheit. And remember, even if we assume that Human Torch can reach this, that would just be in his Nova Flame, which is not the flame he uses most often. So I have no doubt that Iceman would be able to perfectly counter Human Torch's heat. He's just put out stuff that Human Torch cannot reach to, or at very least, he doesn't seem to be able to reach to often. Now let's talk a little bit about their constructs. Yes, both of these characters can create constructs, and they can nullify each other's. However, when looking at them in general, Iceman definitely has an advantage. Not only does Iceman use his constructs more often than Human Torch, and not only can he use them with a greater degree of effectiveness, but Human Torch needs to infuse his constructs with more energy if he doesn't want them to burn out within 3 minutes. However, Iceman's constructs will stick around as long as the energy around him or the air around him is cool enough. And Iceman can lower the temperature of the air by his mere presence or by the use of his attacks. So they will, no matter what, stick around longer than Human Torch's on average. And even if Human Torch uses his own thermokinesis in order to raise the temperature of the objects or the air, he can still, Iceman can still freeze them over again with just a thought. That's what he can do. He can freeze his objects or his constructs over again with just a thought, along with other people and regular objects. So no matter what, they will last longer than Human Torches on average. In general, it just seems that Iceman has more power and more versatility with his abilities than Human Torch does. And this isn't even taking into account his ice clones, his hydrokinesis, his giant form, or the fact that he can create a blizzard under certain circumstances. And to further why Iceman is generally more powerful than Human Torch, it has been stated by Human Torch that with his most powerful attack, the Nova Burst, he could potentially destroy a small moon. Keep in mind though that this is just his most powerful attack, and he would lose his powers after using this. However, with Iceman, he's evolved to the point where he's actually reached the stage of Omega level. He's an Omega level mutant, meaning that he could potentially destroy the entire planet. Now again, this is just potentially, and I don't think he's actually ever been shown doing anything like this, but this is a battle to the death where neither of them will be holding back. And when looking at their potential energy, Iceman is just generally more powerful than Human Torch's most powerful attack, again, potentially. So that paints a very clear picture of who's more powerful on average and potentially. After going through all of these categories, there are really only two categories left where these two show any sort of significant difference, and those two categories are strength and speed. When it comes to strength, Iceman definitely has the advantage. His strength gets augmented simply when he's in his regular ice form, whereas no matter what form Human Torch is in, his strength rests at about peak physical condition level, and he can increase his strength even further when he gets into his giant form. However, when it comes to speed, admittedly, this definitely goes to Human Torch, at least when it comes to when he's in the air. Because again, him being able to catch up to Silver Surfer, lowballing this means that he would be just under Mach 5. Lowballing this even further would mean that he's just supersonic. And even if we put him at just supersonic, Iceman, even on his ice ramps, has never been shown to go anywhere near that fast. So at least in the air, Human Torch is faster. But based on everything else we've said so far, or I've said so far and we've seen so far, I just don't think that would be enough to put Iceman down. Overall, both of these characters have performed some pretty ridiculous feats, and they can use their abilities to amazing degrees, but there's a damn good reason why Iceman is considered to be one of the only Omega level mutants. He's been built up so much in the comics that he essentially cannot be killed by nearly any physical attack, including heat, and he can use his own control over ice to freeze basically anything at absolute zero with barely any effort, and he can use his ability to the fullest. We've seen that Iceman has the power to freeze and take down Human Torch, while Human Torch simply does not have the means to permanently defeat Iceman. And while Human Torch may have the speed advantage, at least in the air, I feel that Iceman's superior strength, durability, stamina, power, versatility, and the fact that he's demonstrated he could counter Human Torch even at his hottest would prove too much for Human Torch to fire back against. So, in my opinion, the winner is Iceman. So guys, thank you all so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. If you honestly disagree with my outcome, I definitely understand. I can definitely see why. Tell me down in the comments below. And honestly, I do really love Human Torch. He is one of my favorite Marvel characters and definitely my favorite Fantastic Four member, whereas Iceman has never really been one of my favorite X-Men. But regardless, tell me what you guys think of this fight. Do you think that Iceman would win? Do you think Human Torch would win? Tell me down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please give this video a huge like. I always appreciate the likes. Comment down below what you thought of it, what you thought of the video, what you thought of the analyses, anything really. And if you guys could subscribe to my channel, that'd be so great. That would really help my channel out. But honestly, no matter what you do, your view is plenty of contributions. So thank you guys so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. And next time on Who, When, and Why, on the Season 9 mid-season finale, we've got Black Widow going up against Solid Snake. See you all then.